Hey everyone, I'm still missing you. I hate it that we're not together yet, but I really appreciate everybody working hard and keeping a good attitude, and we're all in this together. So just if you've anytime during this time we're not together, if you have questions or comments or anything you need to go over with me, be sure and get in contact with me. You can email me, you can leave a message on my home phone. You can drop a comment in our Facebook page, fourth grade Facebook page. But anyway, we're going to go ahead with chapter 12 today, Peter's first battle. Before we do, let's just give a brief overview of what went on in chapter 11. And so, remember, Peter, Susan, and Lucy are still with the Beavers. They had just seen Father Christmas. And if you remember, Peter received a shield and a sword. Susan received a bow with a quiver full of arrows. She also received an ivory horn, and Father Christmas told her that if she blew it, that somebody would come to help. Lucy received a small dagger, and she also received a small bottle made out of diamond that had some cordial in it that just a few drops would restore health to somebody that needed it. So Edmund, in the meantime, is what we went over last chapter. So Edmund is with the witch, and he thought when he arrived at the castle that he was going to get all the Turkish delight he wanted. The queen was going to be sweet to him and happy with him and make him a king, and that's not at all what happened. So he had a miserable night on the sled with the witch. He had no coat, it's snowing, it's cold, it's miserable, and they're trying to make it to the stone table, which is where the kids and the Beavers are also headed to meet Aslan. Now the witch, of course, is trying to get there to stop them and kill them, and as they're going along, one thing that happens is they see a little party happening on the side of the road, and for the first time in the story, Edmund feels sorry for somebody other than himself. Because up to this point, he's a very selfish person. All he thinks about is himself. And of course, the witch turns them into stone, and it makes him sad. But they keep going, and as they're going, the weather changes. Remember, in Narnia, in this book, it's been winter, always winter, and never Christmas. But now Father Christmas has come, but as they're traveling on this sled, the snow stops. Pretty soon it gets slushy instead of snowy. The sled can barely go anymore, and right at the end of that chapter, the dwarf that's driving the sled says, "Oh my gosh, it's spring. This is happening because of Aslan," which really makes the witch mad, and she says, "Don't even mention that name again." So before we do chapter 12, let me go over some words. You might hear the word glades, Glades. So a glade is like an open, grassy area in the middle of a forest. So there's trees all around, but all of a sudden you'll come out into a glade and it's just open, grassy area. Pavilion, that's going to be a large tent, but I don't want you to think about a tent like you camp in. I want you to think about a tent that's beautiful, maybe the kind they set up when somebody's having a wedding. A beautiful tent. Rampant, Rampant, and we've talked about this word ramp before. So remember, words can have more than one meaning, multiple meanings. So ramp in this case means when an animal rears up on its hind legs, and that's what rampant means, an animal rearing up on its hind legs. Standard is another word that has several meanings, and in this case, it's going to mean a flag, and the book says it's a personal flag of a member of a royal family. Awkward, you know that can mean difficult or embarrassing. You're going to hear thickets, and that's like what we would call underbrush around here. It's going to be like the thick growth of bushes or shrubs around and under trees. We call it underbrush here. And then bane, B-A-N-E. That means killer. Dun, dun, dun. And then you're going to hear the word velvet. Once again, a word that has several meanings. most of you are going to think of the material velvet, which is good because it sort of has to do with this. So velvet is very soft. But here's another meaning. When it's a verb, and that means an action word, members of the cat family have claws. Think about a cat that scratches you. They have claws. But members of the cat family, like a lion, can velvet their paws. And that means they retract their claws. And to retract means to pull back, to pull it back. So that on their paws, the claws are not out anymore. So their paws are, for a lion, are very powerful and can do much damage. But when they velvet their paws, they're controlling those claws so that it won't hurt anybody. And then we've talked about some of the different creatures. Don't forget, a centaur has the body of a horse, but the head of a man. And you're going to hear that one also. So this is chapter 12, Peter's first battle. While the dwarf and the white witch were saying this, miles away, the beavers and the children were walking on hour after hour into what seemed a delicious dream. Long ago, they had left their coats behind them, and by now they had even stopped saying to each other, "Look, there's a kingfisher," or "I say, bluebells," or "What was that lovely smell?" or "Just listen to that thrush." They walked on in silence, drinking it all in, passing through patches of warm sunlight, into cool green thickets, and out again into wide mossy glades where tall elm trees raised the leafy roof far overhead, and then into dense masses of flowering currant, and among hawthorn bushes where the sweet smell was almost overpowering. They had been just as surprised as Edmund was when they saw the winter vanishing and the whole wood passing in a few hours or so from January to May. They hadn't even known for certain, as the witch did, that this was what would happen when Aslan came to Narnia. But they all knew that it was her spells which had produced the endless winter. And therefore they all knew when this magic spring began that something had gone wrong, and badly wrong, with the witch's schemes. And after the thaw had been going on for some time, they all realized that the witch would no longer be able to use her sledge. After that, they didn't hurry so much, and they allowed themselves more rests, and longer ones. They were pretty tired by now, of course, but not what I would call bitterly tired, only slow and feeling very dreamy and quiet inside, as you do when you come to the end of a long day out in the open. Susan even had a slight blister on one heel. They had left the course of the big river some time ago, for one had to turn a little to the right, that meant a little to the south, to reach the place of the stone table. Even if this had not been their way, they couldn't have kept to the river valley once the thaw began, for with all the melting snow, the river was soon in flood. A wonderful, roaring, thundering yellow flood, and their path would have been under water. And now the sun got low, and the light got redder, and the shadows got longer, and the flowers began to think about closing. "Not long now," said Mr. Beaver, and began leading them uphill across some very deep, springy moss. It felt nice under their tired feet, in a place where only tall trees grew, very wide apart. The climb, coming at the end of the long day, made them all pant and blow. And just as Lucy was wondering whether she really could get to the top without another long rest, suddenly they were at the top. And this is what they saw. They were on a green open space from which you could look down on the forest spreading as far as you could see in every direction, except right ahead. There, far to the east, was something twinkling and moving. "By gum," whispered Peter to Susan, It's the ocean. In the very middle of this open hilltop was the stone table. It was a great grim slab of gray stone supported on 4 upright stones. It looked very old, and it was cut all over with strange lines and figures that might be the letters of an unknown language. They gave you a curious feeling when you looked at them. The next thing they saw was a pavilion pitched on one side of the open place. A wonderful pavilion it was, and especially now when the light of the setting sun fell upon it, with sides of what looked like yellow silk, and cords of crimson, and tent pegs of ivory, and high above it on a pole, a banner which bore a red rampant lion fluttering in the breeze which was blowing in their faces from the far-off sea. While they were looking at this, they heard a sound of music on their right, and turning in that direction, they saw what they had come to see. Aslan stood in the center of a crowd of creatures who had grouped themselves around him in the shape of a half moon. There were tree women there, and well women, dryads and naiads as they used to be called in our world, who had stringed its instruments. It was they who had made the music. There were 4 great centaurs. The horse part of them was like huge English farm horses, and the man part was like stern but beautiful giants. There was also a unicorn, and a bull with the head of a man, and a pelican, and an eagle, and a huge dog. And next to Aslan stood 2 leopards, of whom one carried his crown and the other his standard. But as for Aslan himself, the beavers and the children didn't know what to do or say when they saw him. People who have not been in Narnia sometimes think that a thing cannot be good and terrible at the same time. If the children had ever thought so, they were cured of it now. For when they tried to look at Aslan's face, they just caught a glimpse of the golden mane and the great, royal, solemn, overwhelming eyes. And then they found they couldn't look at him at all and went all trembly. "Go on," whispered Mr. Beaver. "No," whispered Peter, "you first." "No, sons of Adam before animals," whispered Mr. Beaver back again. "Susan," whispered Peter. "What about you, ladies first?" "No, you're the oldest," whispered Susan. And of course, the longer they went on doing this, the more awkward they felt. Then at last, Peter realized that it was up to him. He drew his sword and raised it to the salute, and hastily saying to the others, "Come on, pull yourselves together," he advanced to the lion and said, "We have come, Aslan." "Welcome, Peter, son of Adam," said Aslan. "Welcome, Susan and Lucy, daughters of Eve. Welcome, he-beaver and she-beaver." His voice was deep and rich, and somehow took the fidgets out of them. They now felt glad and quiet, and it didn't seem awkward to them to stand and say nothing. "But where is the 4th?" asked Aslan. "He's tried to betray them and join the White Witch, O Aslan," said Mr. Beaver. And then something made Peter say, "That was partly my fault, Aslan. I was angry with him, and I think that helped him to go wrong." And Aslan said nothing, either to excuse Peter or to blame him, but merely stood looking at him with his great, unchanging eyes. And it seemed to all of them that there was nothing to be said. "Please, Aslan," said Lucy, "can anything be done to save Edmund?" "All shall be done," said Aslan, "but it may be harder than you think." and then he was silent again for some time. Up to that moment, Lucy had been thinking how royal and strong and peaceful his face looked. Now it suddenly dawned on her that he looked sad as well. But in the next minute, that expression was quite gone. The lion shook his mane and clapped his paws together. Terrible paws, thought Lucy, if he didn't know how to velvet them. And said, "Meanwhile, let the feast be prepared. Ladies, take these daughters of Eve to the pavilion." When the girls had gone, Aslan laid his paw, and though it was velveted, it was very heavy, on Peter's shoulder and said, "Come, son of Adam, and I will show you a far-off sight of the castle where you are to be king." And Peter, with his sword still drawn in his hand, went with the lion to the eastern edge of the hilltop. There a beautiful sight met their eyes. The sun was setting behind their backs. That meant that the whole country below them lay in the evening light, forest and hills and valleys, and winding away like a silver snake, the lower part of the great river. And beyond all this, miles away, was the sea. And beyond the sea, the sky full of clouds which were just turning a rose color with the reflection of the sunset. But just where the land of Narnia met the sea, in fact, at the mouth of the great river, there was something on a little hill shining. It was shining because it was a castle, and of course the sunlight was reflected from all the windows, which looked toward Peter in the sunset. But to Peter, it looked like a great star resting on the seashore. "That, O man," said Aslan, "is Cair Paravel of the Four Thrones, in one of which you must sit as king. I show it to you because you are the firstborn, and you will be the high king over all the rest." And once more Peter said nothing, for at that moment a strange noise woke the silence suddenly. It was like a bugle, but richer. "It is your sister's horn," said Aslan to Peter in a low voice, so low as to be almost a purr, if it is not disrespectful to think of a lion purring. For a moment, Peter did not understand. But then, when he saw all the other creatures start forward and heard Aslan say with a wave of his paw, "Back! Let the prince win his spurs!" he did understand and set off running as hard as he could to the pavilion. And there he saw a dreadful sight. The naiads and dryads were scattering in every direction. Lucy was running toward him as fast as her short legs would carry her, and her face was as white as paper. Then he saw Susan make a dash for a tree and swing herself up, followed by a huge gray beast. At first, Peter thought it was a bear. Then he saw that it looked like a huge dog. Then he realized that it was a wolf standing on its hind legs with its front paws against the tree trunk, snapping and snarling. All the hair on its back stood up on end. Susan had not been able to get higher than the second big branch. One of her legs hung down so that her foot was only an inch or two above the snapping teeth. Peter wondered why she didn't get higher or at least take a better grip. Then he realized that she was just about to faint and that if she fainted, she would fall off. Peter did not feel very brave. Indeed, he felt he was going to be sick, but that made no difference to what he had to do. He rushed straight up to the monster and aimed a slash of his sword at its side. That stroke never reached the wolf. Quick as lightning, it turned its round, flaming eyes and its mouth wide open in a howl of anger. If it had not been so angry that it simply had to howl, it would have got him by the throat at once. As it was, though all this happened too quickly for Peter to think at all, he had just time to duck it down and plunge his sword as hard as he could between the brute's forelegs and into its heart. Then came a horrible, confused moment, like something in a nightmare. He was tugging and pulling, and the wolf seemed neither alive nor dead, and its bared teeth knocked against his forehead, and everything was blood and heat and hair. A moment later, he found that the monster lay dead, and he had drawn his sword out of it and was straightening his back and rubbing the sweat off his face and out of his eyes. He felt tired all over. Then, after a bit, Susan came down the tree. She and Peter felt pretty shaky when they met, and I won't say there wasn't any hugging and crying on both sides. But in Narnia, no one thinks any the worse of you for that. "Quick! Quick!" shouted the voice of Aslan. "Centaurs! Eagles! I see another wolf in the thickets, there behind you. He has just darted away. After him, all of you. He will be going to his mistress, and now is your chance to find the witch and rescue the fourth son of Adam." And instantly, with a thunder of hooves and beating of wings, a dozen or so of the swiftest creatures disappeared into the gathering darkness. Peter, still out of breath, turned and saw Aslan close at hand. "You have forgotten to clean your sword," said Aslan. It was true. Peter blushed when he looked at the bright blade and saw it all smeared with the wolf's hair and blood. He stooped down and wiped it quite clean on the grass, and then wiped it quite dry on his coat. "Hand it to me and kneel, son of Adam," said Aslan. And when Peter had done so, he struck him with the flat of the blade and said, "Rise up, Sir Peter, wolf's bane. And whatever happens, never forget to wipe your sword." Chapter 13, Deep Magic from the Dawn of Time. You know what that means. Okay, so if you guys were here, of course, we would be having some discussion time. So let me just give you a couple of thoughts, things for you guys to think about. One thing I want you to think about is, we've talked about it before, and just try to remember back about something being terrible and good at the same time. And that's that feeling they have when they see Aslan. I think that we compared it to a roller coaster. Something good, something you want to do. You're excited, you want to do it, but it's also terrible. Because as the roller coaster's happening, you get up to the top, it's a wonderful, exciting feeling, but also a terrible feeling. And so those are the kinds of feelings the kids have when they're around Aslan. The other thing I want you to think about is courage. So Peter was very brave and courageous as he fought the wolf, but he was also very scared. So being brave, and if you guys were here, we would have talked about this. A lot of times you think being brave means you're not afraid. That's not what being brave is. Being brave is feeling afraid, but still doing the right thing, still doing what you have to do. And so I want you to think about that as well. We're going to take a quick look at a picture. And so this will give you a better idea also of what the stone table looks like. And so I'm going to try to make sure you see all of it. So the stone table is huge. Don't think of it as something small. It's huge. And remember, the stone table is at the top of they've gone uphill, and it's a flat, big, grassy area. Because think about it, it's big enough to have that stone table, lots of creatures, the pavilion where the girls went. So think about that too. Because when we come back, we'll be talking, the stone table will definitely come into play. Also, another thing to think about is on the stone table there was some writing. And this is something that happened in the first book as well. If you remember, there was writing on the column that was holding the bell and the hammer. Do y'all remember that? So this comes into play in this book as well. So think about that. All right. I love you guys. I'll see you hopefully soon. But if not, I'll see you in chapter 13. Okay. Bye.